Tonight, we're going to explore the complete story of Loki, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as a person, a being of contradictions, transformations, and impossible choices. Now, settle in, relax, and let's begin. In the realms of Norse mythology, there existed a figure who could not be fixed in place, a creature who defied all categorization. The ancient Norse people understood something that many cultures forgot. They understood that the world was not made of absolutes, not made of pure light or pure darkness, not made of simple categories that could contain everything neatly. The Norse knew that some beings existed in the spaces between, in the liminal places where transformation happened, where nothing stayed the same. And one being embodied this principle more than any other. His name was Loki. But here is what makes Loki different from how you might have learned about him. Loki was not simply evil. He was not simply a trickster who enjoyed causing chaos for its own sake. Loki was something far more complex, something far more human, actually, despite being a god, or a giant, or whatever he truly was at his core. Today, we will not follow Loki through time in a simple line. We will not count events one after another, like beads on a string. Instead, we will explore Loki through his many identities, the different versions of himself that he became, the roles he played, the truths he carried. There was Loki, the transformer, the being who could become anything, a salmon in rivers, a seal on rocky shores, an eagle soaring through endless skies, a creature of pure fluidity in a world that demanded rigidity. There was Loki, the deceiver, the one who bent reality through words and cunning, who took what others had built and reshaped it through trickery, but trickery that always carried consequences. There was Loki, the creator, the one who brought forth extraordinary things, impossible things, things that would change the course of all 9 worlds. And there was Loki, the prisoner, the one who would be punished for all he had done, bound beneath the earth, waiting for the end of all things. These are 4 identities, 4 faces of one being, and through them we will understand not just Loki, but something deeper about ourselves, about what it means to change, about what it means to be rejected, about what it means to create something that cannot be controlled. So as you listen to this story, know that you are not hearing a simple tale of good and evil. You are hearing something more profound. You are hearing about transformation, about consequence, about the cycles that never truly end. Let your mind relax. Let your breathing slow. Let yourself drift into these worlds where nothing is as simple as it seems, where one being could be many things, where a story could contain multitudes. And now, let us meet Loki, the transformer. The first identity, the first face, the first truth. Chapter 1. Loki, the transformer. The first identity we will explore is not a single story. It is the essence, the very core of who Loki was in his earliest times, before the rage, before the rejection, before the world forced him into the shape of a villain. This essence was transformation. To understand transformation in Norse mythology, you must understand something about how the ancient Norse saw magic. Magic to them was not about forcing your will onto the world. It was not about dominating nature or bending it to your commands through sheer power. Magic was something far more subtle. The Norse called it cider, and cider was about change, about fluidity, about the ability to move between states, between forms, between realities. Loki was the master of this art. His body was not fixed. His shape was not constant. This was not a trick or an illusion that he created to fool others. This was his actual nature. When Loki became a salmon, he was genuinely a salmon. When he became a seal, he was truly a seal. When he transformed into an eagle, every part of him was eagle, not pretending, not disguising himself, becoming. And this ability, this fluidity, made him valuable to the Aesir. The major gods needed someone who could slip between forms, someone who could go where they could not go, someone who could solve problems that required flexibility, problems that required change. But to understand why Loki could transform, we must understand his origins. We must understand his blood. Loki was not born among the Aesir. He was born among the Jotun, the giants. His father was Farbodi, a name that means the one who disturbs, a giant whose very nature was disturbance, change, instability. His mother was Laufey, a name that means leaf, not stone, solid and unchanging. A leaf, something that moves with the wind, something that transforms with the seasons. So Loki carried in his blood the nature of change itself. He was born of disturbance and transformation, born of a father who disrupted and a mother who was as flexible as wind through leaves. When the Aesir encountered Loki, they saw this potential. They saw a tool, a creature that could solve their problems because he was not bound by the rules that bound them. But they never saw him as an equal, never as someone who truly belonged. Something other, something that needed to be controlled. Yet in these early times, Loki did help. He was called upon when problems arose, and he came. He solved. He transformed. There is one story that perfectly captures what Loki could do in these times. A story of transformation that leads to creation. A story that shows how Loki's fluidity could bring forth something entirely new into the world. It begins with a bet. There was a giant builder named Hrimthars. He came to the gates of Asgard with an offer. "I will build walls around your realm," he said. "Walls so high that no enemy can enter. Walls so strong that they will last until the end of time itself. In exchange, I want the sun, I want the moon, I want the goddess Freyja." The Aesir looked at each other. This was impossible. The sun and moon were essential to all life, and Freya was one of their own. To give these things away would be to give away the very essence of their world. But there was a problem. The giants were growing stronger. The walls around Asgard were crumbling. They needed new defenses, and they needed them quickly. So they went to Loki. This is what the Aesir always did. When they faced a problem they could not solve, they came to Loki. "Loki," they said, "you must solve this. You always have a solution." And Loki smiled, because Loki did always have a solution. Even when those solutions would later create new problems. Even when those solutions would carry consequences that echoed through time. On that night, Loki disappeared. He went to where the giant's horse was kept. A horse named Svadilfari. This horse was extraordinary. It could pull any weight. It could work through the entire night without rest, without fatigue, without stopping. And Loki transformed. He became a mare, a beautiful mare, irresistible and perfect. When Svadilfari saw her, something awakened in the horse. All thoughts of work disappeared. The horse abandoned the giant's construction. It ran into the forest, chasing after the mare, chasing after Loki in his transformed state. All night, the construction stopped. The giant searched for his horse. And Loki led Svadilfari deeper and deeper into the wilderness. By morning, the giant returned alone. His horse was gone. The walls were incomplete. The Aesir had won. They kept their treasures. The sun remained. The moon remained. Freya remained. But there is more to this story. 9 months later, Loki returned to Asgard, and he was no longer alone. With him came a foal, a horse unlike any that had ever existed. It had 8 legs instead of 4. 8 legs that could carry it across the sky and through the 9 worlds. 8 legs that could move faster than any other creature in existence. This horse was called Sleipnir, and Sleipnir would become the Mount of Odin himself, the greatest horse ever to exist, born from Loki's transformation, born from his ability to become what was needed in that moment. This is what transformation meant for Loki in these early times. It was not about deception for its own sake. It was about becoming what the moment required. It was about solving problems through change, through fluidity, through the refusal to be fixed in one form. But transformation meant something deeper as well. When you can become anything, you lose something. You lose the comfort of a fixed identity. You lose the certainty of knowing exactly what you are. Every time Loki changed his form, he left part of himself behind. Every transformation required him to become someone new, to shed his old self and take on another. This is the human experience as well, is it not? We are constantly transforming, becoming different versions of ourselves, depending on who we are with, depending on what is demanded of us. The child becomes the adult. The student becomes the teacher. The innocent becomes the experienced. And each transformation requires us to lose something, to shed a previous version of ourselves that we can never fully reclaim. Loki understood this intimately. His ability to transform was not just power. It was also a kind of suffering, a constant death and rebirth, a constant losing and finding of self. In these early times, Loki had not yet turned that suffering into rage. He had not yet let the rejection he felt transform into destruction. He was simply the transformer, the being who could become anything, the creature of fluidity in a world that demanded rigidity. He helped when asked. He solved what seemed unsolvable. He created wonders like Sleipnir. And perhaps, in another universe, in another version of this story, Loki would have remained this way forever. Simply the helpful transformer. Simply the creative problem solver. But the universe we live in is not that universe. And Loki would not remain simply the transformer, because change is not always welcome, and fluidity is not always appreciated. And eventually, those who are different begin to feel the weight of their difference. They begin to feel the distance between themselves and those around them. And that is where our next identity begins. That is where Loki, the deceiver, emerges. Chapter 2. Loki, the Deceiver. In every mythology, there exists an archetype, a figure who operates by different rules than others. In African traditions, it is Anansi, the spider. In Japanese folklore, it is Kitsune, the fox. The Norse had Loki. But to call Loki simply a trickster is to miss something essential. A trickster is someone who deceives for personal gain. Loki was what the Norse called a skald, a poet. But a skald was not merely someone who spoke beautiful words. A skald was someone who could transform reality through language. Someone who could make people believe something that had not existed before. Someone who could bend the truth so skillfully that the truth itself became negotiable. A skald was a creator of realities. And if you could convince people that something was true, then, in that moment, for them, it became true. That is the magic of deception at its deepest level. Not lying for its own sake, but reshaping what is real through the power of words and actions. Loki was a master of this art. But there is something that separates Loki's deceptions from ordinary trickery. Every time Loki deceived, there was a consequence. Every lie carried weight. Every trick left marks. Loki did not deceive simply to gain something. Loki deceived to transform, to change things fundamentally, to alter the course of events in ways that could never be undone. There is a story that shows this perfectly, and it begins with hunger. One day, Loki was traveling with Odin and Henia. The three of them had been walking for many hours. They were tired. They were hungry. And as they walked, they came upon a large ox. The ox was perfect, large, healthy, full of meat. The three decided to kill it and cook it for their meal. This was survival. This was necessity. But when they built their fire and began to cook the meat, something strange happened. The meat would not cook. No matter how much heat they applied, the flesh remained raw, cold, untouched by the flames. It was as if the fire itself refused to work. The three stood confused, hungry, frustrated. Then a voice came from above. An eagle was circling in the sky. The eagle descended and landed near their fire. "I can help you," the eagle said. "I can make this meat cook. Let me do this for you." The three were desperate. They agreed. The eagle used its magic. The meat began to cook. Steam rose from it. The smell became intoxicating. It was finally happening. They would eat, but then the eagle spoke again. "I will cook your meat," it said, "but there is a price. I will take the best portions for myself, the finest parts. You may have what remains." Loki felt something shift inside him. This was betrayal. He had accepted help from this creature, and now it was taking advantage of that trust. In his rage, Loki grabbed a long stick and struck the eagle. But the stick attached itself to the eagle's talons, and the eagle began to fly higher and higher. And Loki, holding onto the stick, was lifted into the air. "Wait," Loki cried out. "Stop, please." The eagle revealed itself as the giant Thrym in disguise. Thrym, the storm giant. Thrym who lived on the edges of the world. "I will release you," Thrym said. but only if you bring me something. Only if you deliver to me the apples of Idun." Loki had no choice. He agreed. He was released. He fell to the earth, and he made his way back to Asgard. His mind was already working, already planning, already deceiving. Idun was a goddess. Her role in the cosmos was specific and essential. She tended a sacred orchard. In that orchard grew golden apples. These were not ordinary fruit. These apples contained the very essence of youth. Every time the Aesir ate one of these apples, wrinkles disappeared. Gray hair turned black again. Strength returned. They became eternally young. The apples of Idun were the secret to the gods' immortality. The apples hung from the trees around them, golden and perfect in the light. "Idun," he said, "I have heard of apples even more powerful than yours. Apples that grow on the other side of the forest. Apples that are said to grant not just youth, but wisdom as well. Would you not like to see them? Would you not like to know if such things exist?" Idun was curious. She was a goddess, yes, but she was also someone who wondered, someone who questioned. Loki used this against her. He led her out of Asgard. He led her beyond the protective walls. And when they reached the edge of the world, Thrym, the giant, was waiting. The giant captured Idun. He took her to his realm. He took the apples with her. And in Asgard, something began to happen. Without the apples, the Aesir could no longer maintain their youth. They began to age. Their hair turned white. Their skin wrinkled. Their bodies grew weak. The light in their eyes faded. They looked at their hands and saw age spots they had never seen before. They felt pain in their joints that had never existed. It was a slow death, a gradual fading, and they knew exactly who was responsible. They found Loki immediately. Their eyes were cold with fury. "Bring her back," they commanded. "Bring back Idun. Bring back the apples, or you will die. We will kill you ourselves." Loki had no choice. He transformed himself into a falcon. His wings beat against the air. He flew to the realm where Thrym held Idun captive. When he found her, he used more magic. He transformed Idun into a nut, small, compact, easy to carry. And holding her in his talons, he flew back toward Asgard. Thrym saw him leaving. The giant transformed into an eagle and chased him across the sky. The two soared over mountains and forests. The falcon carrying the nut, the eagle pursuing. But the Aesir were waiting at the gates of Asgard. They had prepared a trap. They had built a massive fire right at the entrance to their realm. As Loki flew through the gates, the Aesir ignited the fire. The eagle pursuing him, flew directly into the flames. Thrym's wings caught fire. He fell from the sky. He crashed to the earth and did not rise again. Loki transformed Idunn back to her true form. The apples were restored. The Aesir ate them. Their youth returned. Their strength returned. Their wrinkles faded. They became themselves again. But something had changed. The trust between Loki and the Aesir had cracked. It would never fully heal. They had seen what Loki could do when motivated by hunger or rage. They had felt the weight of his deception. They had experienced a slow death because of his choices. And they would remember. But the story of Loki's deceptions did not end there. Because there was one deception that would be far worse than the theft of the apples. One deception that would create a wound that could never be healed. One deception that would change everything. This deception involved the death of Balder. Balder was everything that Loki was not. Balder was beautiful, extraordinarily beautiful. When Balder moved through the world, flowers bloomed in his footsteps. When he smiled, the entire cosmos seemed to smile with him. Balder carried light with him wherever he went. Not metaphorical light, actual light. His presence illuminated the world. The Aesir loved him. His father Odin saw him as the future. His mother Frigg loved him above all other things. Every god wanted to be near him. Every creature wanted to bask in his presence. Everyone loved Balder, except one. Loki watched from the shadows. Loki saw how easily Balder was accepted, how naturally he belonged, how unconditionally he was loved. She visited every inanimate object, and to each one she made the same request. Promise me you will not harm my son. Promise me that nothing you do will hurt Balder. Promise me this, and I will know he is safe. One by one, they promised. Fire promised. Water promised. Every tree and every blade of grass promised. Every metal and every stone promised. Every creature that lived and every force of nature promised. They all made the same vow. Balder was now invulnerable. No weapon could harm him, and something dark began to grow inside Loki's chest. One day, Balder began having dreams, dark dreams, terrible dreams. Dreams in which he died, in which his light was extinguished, in which he ceased to exist. Frigg heard about these dreams and became frantic with fear. Her beautiful son, her perfect son, having nightmares about his own death. This could not be allowed to happen. So Frigg did something extraordinary. She journeyed through all 9 worlds. She visited every living thing. No force of nature could touch him. He was protected by the entire cosmos through the promises of every single thing that existed. The Aesir began to play a game. They would stand before Balder and throw things at him. Spears, swords, stones, arrows, everything bounced off him harmlessly. Everything ricocheted away. It became a celebration, a festival, a confirmation of Balder's invulnerability. The gods laughed and played. They threw harder things. They threw faster things. Nothing worked. Balder stood unharmed, radiant, perfect. But Loki watched. And Loki, watching, began to think. He began to consider, to analyze, to search for any possibility that Frigg might have missed something, some small thing, some insignificant thing. And Loki found it. There was a plant, a small plant. A plant so insignificant that Frigg had not even thought to ask it to make a promise. This plant was called mistletoe. It was young, it was weak. It was nothing that anyone would consider a weapon. Loki pulled the mistletoe from the earth. He fashioned it into a dart. Then he approached Hœnir, a god who was blind. Hœnir was also at a celebration. He was standing near Balder, wanting to participate in the game, but unable to see, to throw anything at him. Loki whispered in Hœnir's ear, "Everyone here is throwing things at Balder." Loki said, "All the gods are playing this game. You should participate too. Here, I will help you. I will guide your throw. Here is a dart. Throw it, and you will finally be part of this celebration." Hœnir, grateful to be included, accepted the dart from Loki. Loki guided his hand. Hœnir threw. The mistletoe dart flew through the air. It was so small, so insignificant. It seemed almost beautiful as it traveled toward Balder. It struck him in the chest, and Balder fell, dead. In that instant, the light went out of the world. Not metaphorically. The sun seemed dimmer. Joy became impossible. An essential part of existence had been extinguished. The Aesir screamed. Frigg fell to her knees. Odin's eyes filled with a rage that had never existed before. And they all knew. They all understood in that moment. It was Loki. It was always Loki. The deceiver had deceived one final time. But this time, the consequences could never be undone. This time, the wound was permanent. This time, Balder would never return. And the Aesir's patience with Loki was finally, completely, irrevocably exhausted. The second identity of Loki was the deceiver, the one who bent reality through cunning, the one who took what was not his and reshaped it for his own purposes. But each deception had carried weight. Each lie had left marks on the world. And the last deception the deception of Baldr's death was a line that could not be uncrossed. Chapter 3. Loki, the Creator. It may seem strange to speak of Loki as a creator. We know him now as someone who deceives, someone who destroys, someone who brings chaos into ordered worlds. But there's a truth that is often forgotten in the telling of Loki's story. Loki did not only tear things down. Loki also built things up. Loki created. And what Loki created was extraordinary. Perhaps dangerous. Perhaps impossible to control. But extraordinary nonetheless. Most of us think of creation as something purely good, something pure, something that comes from a place of love or benevolence. But what if creation could be ambiguous? What if the things we create could be both blessing and curse? What if a creator could bring forth something that was fundamentally both wonderful and terrible? Loki was the master of this paradox. He had children, many of them, but 3 were special. 3 that would define the destiny of all 9 worlds. 3 that would carry within them the seeds of both salvation and destruction. Let us begin with the first. Fenrir was a wolf, but not an ordinary wolf that you might find in a forest or on a mountainside. Fenrir was a wolf that grew larger with each passing day. With each passing week, his strength increased. The Aesir watched him and marveled at his power, but they also watched him with fear, because there was a prophecy. The prophecy said that one day Fenrir's mouth would grow so large that his jaws would touch both the sky and the earth simultaneously. His eyes would burn like flames. His teeth would be like daggers. And on a certain day, a day that had already been written into the fabric of destiny, Fenrir would devour the gods themselves. The Aesir could not allow this, so they decided to chain him. They brought ordinary chains. Fenrir broke them as easily as breaking spiderwebs. The wolf simply flexed his muscles and the chains shattered. They brought magical chains. Fenrir snapped them as well. No matter what they tried, Fenrir was stronger. Fenrir was faster. Fenrir could not be contained by normal means. So they went to the dwarves, the master craftspeople of the 9 worlds. The dwarves who could create things that defied the laws of nature itself. The dwarves forged a chain called Gleipnir. This chain was made from impossible things. The muscles of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear. Impossibilities woven together into something that might actually hold. When Fenrir saw the chain, he felt something he had never felt before. Fear. If this chain holds me, Fenrir said, and I cannot break free, then you will never release me. You will leave me here, in captivity, forever. Surely, you do not expect me to agree to this." The Aesir looked at each other. They understood his fear, and they had an idea. A test of trust. "If you allow us to bind you with this chain," they said, "we will release you when Ragnarok comes. We will free you when the end of all things arrives. We promise this." But Fenrir wanted proof. He wanted a guarantee. A token that the Aesir would keep their word. "Someone must place their hand in my mouth," Fenrir said. "Someone must remain here with me as a hostage. As proof that you intend to keep your promise. If you are truly honest with me, surely you can do this." The Aesir looked at each other. No one wanted to offer their hand. No one wanted to stay here in captivity. No one was willing to take this risk, except Tyr. Tyr was the god of war, the god of courage, the god of honor and contracts. And Tyr understood something that the others did not. He understood that sometimes to make a promise means something, you must be willing to sacrifice for it. Tyr placed his hand into Fenrir's mouth. The chain, Glipnir, was wrapped around Fenrir. And when the wolf realized he could not break free, he closed his jaws. Tyr's hand was severed. Blood dripped onto the stone. Tyr withdrew, now one-handed, but he had done what was necessary. He had given his hand to seal a promise. He had proven that the Aesir would keep their word. Fenrir remained chained, but the prophecy remained as well. One day, the chains would break. One day, Fenrir would rise, and when that day came, he would be free to fulfill his destiny. This was Loki's creation, a creature of pure power, a being that could not be tamed, a wolf that embodied the very concept of inevitability. Loki created Fenrir knowing what the creature would become, knowing that it would threaten the very gods themselves. And yet, he created it anyway. But Fenrir was only the beginning. Loki had a second child, and this child was even more vast than Fenrir, even more impossible to comprehend. Jormungandr was a serpent, but to call Jormungandr a serpent is to fail to capture the enormity of what she was. Jormungandr was so large that she circled the entire world. Imagine a snake so immense that her body could wrap around the entire earth. Imagine a creature so vast that she was constantly biting her own tail. Jormungandr lived in the oceans, in the deepest waters, in places where no light had ever reached, in depths so profound that the pressure would crush any ordinary creature instantly. And there, in those lightless depths, Jormungandr slept. But sleep was not rest for her. In her sleep, she dreamed, and from her mouth, in her dreaming, venom flowed, poison so powerful that it would burn through anything. Poison that fell from her fangs like rain into the sea. The Aesir knew of Jormungandr's existence, and they knew what would happen if she ever truly woke. If Jormungandr awoke, the sea would rise. The waters would overflow their boundaries. The oceans would flood the land. Everything would be drowned. Everything would be destroyed. The very earth would sink beneath the waves. And yet, there was nothing they could do to stop it. Jormungandr represented something fundamental in the Norse cosmology. She represented the chaos that lives at the edges, the force that is always ready to overflow, the enemy of order, the inevitable challenge to any system of stability. Loki created Jormungandr knowing all of this, knowing that his creation would threaten to destroy the entire world, knowing that one day she would wake, and knowing that when she did, everything would change. But Loki was not finished creating. There was a third child, and this child was different from the others. Hel was not purely a creature of destruction. She was not simply a force of chaos. Hel was something more complex. Her upper body was that of a beautiful woman. Her appearance in the upper half was striking, almost lovely. But her lower body was that of a corpse. Decaying flesh, gray skin, the appearance of death itself. She was neither fully alive nor fully dead. She existed in the space between, in the liminal place where one state becomes another. Odin looked at Hel and was disturbed by what he saw, so he exiled her. He sent her down to Niflheim, the realm of ice, the realm of mist, the realm that existed before time itself. There, in that frozen land beneath the earth, Hel built a kingdom. She built a hall called Ylivindr, a place with walls and a roof, a place with structure and organization. In this hall, she welcomed the dead, those who died of sickness, those who died of old age, those who died without violence, and Hel was not cruel to them. She was not a torturer. She was not a punisher. She was a caretaker, a guide, a queen who understood that death was not a punishment. Death was a transition, a rest, a necessary part of existence. In Hel's realm, there was hospitality, there was order, there was care. Hel was the creation of Loki that spoke of acceptance, that spoke of the acknowledgement that not everything in life or chaos, that some things are simply necessary, quiet, inevitable, and even in their own way, gentle. The third identity of Loki was the creator, a creator of extraordinary things. things that had never existed before, things that changed the fate of all 9 worlds: Fenrir, Jormungandr, Hel, each one unique, each one impossible, each one carrying within itself both wonder and danger. But here is the truth that many miss about creation. Creation always contains the seeds of destruction. What we build will eventually be torn down. What we make will eventually be unmade. Every creator, in creating, plants the seeds of their own creation's eventual destruction. Loki understood this better than anyone. He created Fenrir, knowing that the wolf would break his chains and devour the gods. He created Jormungandr, knowing that she would one day flood all the worlds. He created Hel, knowing that she would receive all the dead, and that her realm would grow and grow, until it became as significant as the realm of the living. In creating these 3, Loki guaranteed that the current order of the universe would not last forever. He guaranteed that one day everything would change. He guaranteed the coming of the Ragnarok, the end of all things. And yet, he created anyway. Perhaps Loki understood something that the other gods did not. Perhaps he understood that creation without the possibility of destruction is not really creation. It is just rearrangement, just moving things around within a system that is already fixed. True creation requires the possibility of death, the possibility of change, the possibility of ending. Loki was a creator who brought forth real creations, creations that mattered, creations that would alter the course of destiny itself. And in doing so, he ensured his own fate as well. Because to create the instruments of your own destruction is to accept your own ending. Loki, the transformer, had helped the Aesir. Loki, the deceiver, had betrayed them. And Loki, the creator, had guaranteed their doom. The 4th identity was already beginning to emerge, and it was an identity of consequence, an identity of reckoning, an identity of the inevitable. Chapter 4: Loki, the prisoner. But every identity has an ending. Every character faces their moment of reckoning. For Loki, that moment came with the death of Balder, because, unlike his previous deceptions, unlike his previous tricks that could be undone or resolved, the death of Balder was permanent. Balder would not return. The light that had left the world would not come back, and the Aesir's patience, which had been stretched thin through centuries, finally snapped completely. Loki knew immediately what was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the way the gods looked at him, in the shift of power that rippled through Asgard. There would be no forgiveness this time. There would be no negotiation. There would be no clever trick that could undo what had been done. So Loki ran. He abandoned Asgard. He left behind everything he had ever known. He turned his back on the only realm that had ever accepted him, however reluctantly, and he fled into the 9 worlds seeking refuge. He dove into the river Alver, thinking the waters would hide him, thinking that as a salmon he could disappear into the currents and become invisible to the Aesir's search. But the Aesir always found him. They came with nets and hunting magic. They dredged the rivers. They used every resource at their disposal, and Loki, as a salmon, had to flee again. He became a seal. He swam to rocky shores and hauled himself onto stone. He thought the isolation would protect him. He thought that on the margins of the world, far from the centers of power, he could find safety. But the Aesir came even there. He became an eagle. He soared through the skies with wings spread wide. He flew to the highest peaks where no one could reach him. He flew above the clouds where the air itself seemed too thin to nothing. But even the sky was not far enough. He became fire itself. He tried to scatter his essence across the realm, becoming something so dispersed that no one could ever catch him. He tried to become smoke and flame and pure energy. But the Aesir pursued him through every form, through every transformation, through every possible shape his fluid body could take. Because the pursuit was not just physical, it was spiritual, it was psychological, it was the weight of consequence catching up to him. It was the reality that you cannot run from what you have done. You cannot escape the consequences of your actions through transformation or trickery or escape. Eventually, they caught him. The Aesir brought Loki back to Asgard. But this time, there would be no trial. There would be no hearing. There would be no attempt at justice or fairness. There was only sentence. There was only punishment, and that punishment would be eternal. Deeper than any normal dungeon, deeper than any mortal prison. They took him to a chamber that existed in the spaces between worlds, a place where neither light nor time functioned the way they did elsewhere. And there, they prepared his captivity. They brought Narfi, one of Loki's sons, and using magic so terrible that it should not be spoken aloud, they transformed Narfi's intestines into chains, not dead chains made of metal or stone, but living chains, still pulsing, still moving, still connected to the body from which they came. These chains were wrapped around Loki's body, binding him, holding him fast. Then they placed 3 stones beneath him, one under his shoulders, one under his back, one under his knees. The stones were cold and hard. They would never shift. They would never move. They would be his only furniture for eternity. And then came the final part of the punishment. They took a serpent, a venomous serpent whose poison was so potent that it could burn through anything at all. And they suspended it above Loki's face. They fixed it to a branch above his head. The branch was old and twisted and poisoned. And there, in that suspended position, the serpent remained. Its venom dripped, drop by drop, constantly, day after day, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. The venom fell onto Loki's face, burning his skin, burning his eyes, burning his eyes, burning away at his consciousness itself. Each drop was agony. Each moment was torture, and there was no end to it. There was only the knowledge that this would continue forever, that his punishment was as eternal as he was, that for all time he would sit in this chamber with venom falling on his face, that he would know nothing but pain and darkness and the passage of countless years. But Loki was not entirely alone in his suffering. There was a goddess named Sigyn. She was Loki's wife, and she loved him even now. Even after the death of Balder, even after his deceptions and his crimes, even after the Aesir had condemned him to eternal torment, Sigyn came to this dark place. She brought a bowl, and she positioned herself above Loki's face, and she held the bowl there, catching the venom before it could fall on him. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year, Sigyn stood there with her bowl, protecting her husband from the poison. Her arms grew weary, her heart grew heavy, but she stayed. But when the bowl became full, she had to turn away. She had to empty it. She had to step back for just a moment to prevent it from overflowing. And in those moments, the venom fell directly onto Loki's face, and Loki would thrash. He would writhe. His body would convulse with such violence that the earth above would shake. The stone would crack. The entire world would tremble, and people in Midgard, the human realm, would feel these tremors. They would feel these earthquakes. They would not know that they were the result of Loki's suffering. They would not understand that far beneath their feet, a god was being tortured for crimes that could never be forgiven. But the tremors would come again and again, a constant reminder that somewhere in the depths something was not at rest. This was the fourth identity, the prisoner. The prisoner, the one beneath the earth, the one who suffered eternally for what he had done. And yet, in the midst of this suffering, Loki held on to something that sustained him through the endless pain, something that gave him a reason to endure. Loki held on to a prophecy that had been told long before his imprisonment. A prophecy that spoke of the end of all things. A prophecy called the Ragnarok. The prophecy said that one day the world would end. One day there would come a winter so cold that no warmth could touch it. A winter that would last for 3 years without end, without summer, without relief. The stars would disappear from the sky. The sun would go dark. The moon would vanish. And in the darkness and the cold, all order would break down. The mountains would crumble. The earth would sink into the sea. The sea would rise and flood the land. The sky would split open. The bonds that held things in place would rupture and tear. And when that day came, Loki knew something that the Aesir had perhaps forgotten, or perhaps had chosen not to think about. When that day came, the bonds that held him would also break. The chains made of Narfi's intestines would snap like thread. The stones beneath him would crumble. The darkness would give way to chaos, and Loki would rise. Loki would be free. And he would not be alone in his liberation. Fenrir would also break free. The wolf would rise with a hunger so vast that nothing could satisfy it. And Jormungandr would wake from her ancient sleep in the depths of the sea. The serpent would thrash and convulse. Her venom would spray across the sky and the earth. The oceans would rise and flood the world. And together, these 3 creations of Loki would march against the gods. They would march against Asgard. They would march against the entire order of the universe itself. The Aesir would fight. They would struggle. They would resist with everything they had. But it would not be enough, because Ragnarok was not a battle that could be won. It was a cycle. It was the inevitable end that comes to all things. So Loki waited, day after day, year after year, millennium after millennium. The venom fell on his face. He suffered in the darkness. He endured pain that had no name. But he waited because he knew that waiting had an end. He knew that his imprisonment was not truly infinite. He knew that one day the world would shake itself apart, and on that day he would be free. This was the knowledge that sustained him. This was the hope that kept him sane through ages of torture. The knowledge that in his suffering, in his imprisonment, in his punishment, he was still part of something greater. He was still part of the grand cycle of creation and destruction. He was part of the inevitable. He was part of destiny itself. The 4th identity of Loki was the prisoner, the one who waited, the one who suffered, the one who knew that his punishment would one day end, not because he would be forgiven, not because the Aesir would have mercy, but because nothing lasts forever. Because all systems eventually break down. Because destruction is the inevitable result of any creation. Loki, the transformer, had helped the gods. Loki, the deceiver, had betrayed them. Loki, the creator, had ensured their doom. And Loki, the prisoner, was the fulfillment of all these roles. He was the consequence. He was the reckoning. He was the price that had to be paid. And though he suffered, though he endured agony beyond measure, though he sat in darkness with venom falling on his face for ages beyond counting, Loki was not truly defeated, because he knew what was coming. He knew that the cycle would turn. He knew that one day everything would end. And in that ending, he would be free. Conclusion: the cycle. Loki was many people. We began by knowing Loki as the transformer, the being who could become anything, who created Sleipnir with 8 legs that could carry Odin across all 9 worlds. In those early times, Loki was useful. Loki was helpful. Loki was someone the Aesir called upon when they needed solutions to impossible problems. But Loki was also the deceiver, the one who bent reality through cunning and trickery, who stole the apples of Idun and watched the gods age rapidly, who killed Balder with a dart of mistletoe and brought darkness to the entire cosmos. The deceiver was motivated by something deeper than simple malice. He was motivated by the sting of rejection, by the knowledge that no matter what he did, no matter how much he helped, he would never truly belong. Loki was the creator, the one who brought forth extraordinary things into existence. Fenrir, the wolf; Jormungandr, the serpent; Tel, the queen of the dead. Each of these creations was unique, impossible, dangerous, but they were also wonders. They were also proof that Loki could make things that had never existed before, things that would echo through eternity. And Loki was the prisoner, the one bound beneath the earth with venom falling on his face, the one who waited through endless ages of suffering, the one who held on to a prophecy, the one who knew that even his eternal punishment would one day end. For identities, for faces, one being. But here is something important that we must understand, something that the Norse people understood deeply. Loki was not evil, but Loki was also not good. The Norse did not view their mythology through the lens of absolute morality. They understood that the world was far more complex than simple categories like good and evil. The Norse understood cycles. They understood that what rises must eventually fall, that what is created must eventually be destroyed. that what is destroyed will eventually be recreated. This was the nature of their cosmology. Not a linear story with a clear ending. Not a battle between good and evil that would end with good triumphant forever, but a cycle, an eternal return. A constant dance of creation and destruction. Loki was part of this cycle. He was the change that was necessary. He was the force that reminded the Aesir that their order was not permanent, that their power was not absolute, that one day everything would be transformed. When Loki helped the Aesir, he was fulfilling one part of the cycle. He was helping to maintain the order that existed. But when Loki deceived and betrayed and killed, he was beginning the inevitable breakdown. He was planting the seeds of transformation. And when Loki waited in his prison, knowing that Ragnarok was coming, he was the embodiment of patience, the embodiment of the knowledge that all systems eventually collapse, that all orders are temporary, that change is the only constant. In our own world, we see this cycle reflected everywhere. Groups that reject those who are different often find that those differences become threats. Systems that do not make space for change eventually break under the pressure of necessary transformation. People who are treated as outsiders often become the catalysts for fundamental shifts in society. Loki reminds us of this, not because Loki was right to deceive or to kill, but because Loki shows us what happens when rejection accumulates, when someone is used and discarded, when a being is never truly welcomed despite their contributions, when someone carries the weight of being fundamentally other. Eventually, something shifts. Eventually, the accumulated rejection transforms into something else, something that cannot be controlled, something that brings change whether anyone wants it or not. But there is more to Loki's story than just destruction. There is also creation. There is also the beauty of bringing forth something new. Loki's children, despite their role in Ragnarok, were extraordinary creations. They were unique. They were powerful. They were proof that something genuinely new could enter the world. And there is Hel, the daughter who was different from her brothers, the one who ruled a kingdom not of punishment but of rest, the one who showed that Loki's creations were not all about destruction and chaos. Some of them were about acceptance, about the acknowledgement that not everything needs to be violent or dramatic. Some things can be quiet. Some things can be gentle. Some things can simply be necessary. In this way, Loki was also a creator of compassion, a creator of rest, a creator of the spaces where people could simply be without fear. They understood that even the gods would not last forever. Odin himself, the king of the gods, would be devoured by Fenrir during Ragnarok. Thor would die fighting Jormungandr. The entire structure of Asgard would be destroyed. But here is the crucial part. After the destruction, there would be renewal. After Ragnarok, new earth would emerge from the waters. The sun would have a daughter who would take her place in the sky. The stars would shine again, and new gods would arise. Not the same as before, not the Aesir, but new beings, new powers. A new order built on the ashes of the old. Loki was not the end. Loki was the transitional figure, the one who bridged the old world and the new, the one whose imprisonment guaranteed that the cycle would continue, the one whose eventual liberation would trigger the transformation of all things. This is the deepest meaning of Loki's story. It is not a story about good triumphing over evil. It is a story about the inevitability of change, about the necessity of cycles, about the knowledge that nothing we create will last forever, and about the strange comfort that can come from accepting this truth. As you lie here, listening to this story, you are being asked to consider these themes. You are being asked to think about transformation, about rejection and its consequences, about creation and destruction, about cycles and renewal. You are being asked to see yourself in Loki, to recognize that you, too, are multiple, that you, too, contain contradictions, that you, too, have the capacity to help and to harm, to create and to destroy, to be accepted and to be rejected. Loki was not one thing. He was many things. And in being many things, he was more human than many of the gods who were purely defined by single roles. Odin was the All-Father. Thor was the protector. Frigg was the mother. But Loki was the one who changed, the one who became different depending on circumstances, the one who carried within himself all possibilities. And perhaps, in recognizing this about Loki, we can recognize it about ourselves as well. We are not fixed. We are not defined by single roles or single identities. We are constantly becoming, constantly transforming, constantly shifting between different versions of ourselves, depending on who we are with and what is demanded of us. When we are not welcomed despite our efforts, when we are treated as useful tools rather than as genuine beings, something changes within us. We transform. We become something else. This does not excuse harm, but it explains it. It contextualizes it. It reminds us that harm does not emerge from nowhere. It emerges from cycles of rejection and exclusion and dismissal. Loki's story, then, is also a warning. It is a warning about what happens when we reject those who are different. It is a warning about the consequences of not making space for those who do not fit into our categories. It is a warning that change will come whether we welcome it or not, and that if we do not embrace transformation voluntarily, it will come to us through destruction. But Loki's story is also a comfort. It is a comfort because it reminds us that even the darkest periods are not permanent. Even imprisonment can be endured if you know that it will eventually end. Even suffering can be borne if you understand it as part of a larger cycle. Even destruction is not truly the ending. It is transformation. It is the space between one world and the next. The Norse people, living in harsh climates, facing long dark winters, understood this deeply. They understood that the winter was not permanent, that spring would come again, that the cycle would turn. And so Loki, waiting beneath the earth with venom falling on his face, is also a figure of hope. Not because his situation is hopeful, but because he knows what is coming. He knows that the cycle will turn. He knows that one day everything will change. So you, listening to this story in the darkness, can take comfort in this as well. Whatever you are facing, whatever seems permanent or unchangeable, it is part of a cycle. It will transform. It will shift. Nothing remains the same forever. This is the teaching of Loki. This is what his 4 identities have to tell us. The Transformer reminds us that we are not fixed. We can change. We can become what is needed. The Deceiver reminds us that our actions have consequences, that what we do to others echoes through time, that rejection accumulates and transforms into something we cannot control. The Creator reminds us that we bring forth new things into the world through our actions, that what we create will outlive us, that we are part of something larger than ourselves. And the Prisoner reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is a cycle, there is a turning, there is an eventual transformation. Now, as you rest here in the darkness, as your breathing slows and your mind drifts, carry these truths with you. Know that you are multiple. Know that you are capable of transformation. Know that your actions matter and echo forward. Know that you are creating something through your existence. That you, too, are part of something larger, something eternal, something that will continue long after you are gone. Sleep now, sleep deeply, and let the story of Loki settle into your dreams like ancient stones settling into still water, quietly, gradually, becoming part of the foundation beneath everything. Thank you for journeying through these 9 worlds with me. Thank you for meeting Loki in all his complexity. Thank you for allowing this ancient story to become part of your night. Rest well, sleep peacefully, and know that you are never truly alone. Somewhere, someone else is listening to this same story. Someone else is drifting to sleep in a different time zone, a different place. Someone else is connecting with these ancient truths. It is strangely comforting to know who else is out there falling asleep to the same mythological worlds. And now, gentle sleep awaits you.